Well, everyone, she has created a wild new series which follows what happens to an actress after her private photos get exposed online. I'm Sam Eckmann of Gold Derby. With me is the co-creator, writer, executive producer of I Hate Suzie, Lucy Prebble. And, you know, this show, you created this with Billie Piper, and the two of you have a long creative history together after Secret Diary of a Call Girl and your play, The Effect. And I'm wondering kind of how soon after working on those things, did you know you wanted to dive in and create another series together?
Well, it was a while actually. Billy and I are sort of very close friends first, and it's partly because of how well we know each other that we wanted to work together on something else again. Because, as Billy was always saying, why, wouldn't we move much faster because we understand so completely what each other can do and think about things. And I think really the impetus was what television show would we make if we could do what we wanted, and what television show would we make if we were making something that we would like to see. And it's strange how unusual that is as a thought process. Most of the time you're, as an actor in Billy's case, always just responding to scripts, or even as a writer in my case, quite often you're either responding to people coming to you with ideas, which is a great position to be in, but they're someone else's idea and they own it, or you're trying to guess what other people want to see and do that. And it was honestly the first time that I've ever thought really about a creative project in terms of, well, what would I do if I could actually do anything? And that is rare. And that's why the show, I think, is quite different and has a particularly, well, you said wild tone, and I would say quite, yeah, forceful, extreme tone. And hopefully it's original, whether people like it or not. I think it feels different.
Yeah, I would agree. It feels very original. And I
Thank
talked to
you.
Billie earlier, and you know, we talked about how the original conversations that you two had were more about sort of a female friendship show. And I'm curious from your end, what was the sort of impetus to sort of make a shift, and what gravitated you towards this incident of hacked photos?
Well, I'm never satisfied by a kind of cozy and traditional idea. I'm not in my work in other formats and other mediums either. I only really get excited by something that keeps me awake at night as a thought, but also principally I haven't ever seen done before. And that's what really gets me going. And the idea of spending years and years writing something and really committing and caring about something, because I only really do one project at a time, maybe two at most, is the thought of, oh, I haven't ever seen this before and I think it could be really great. And as much as I think that the female friendship is central and the beating heart of I Hate Suzie, and it is, that's not enough for me to want to create a show around as an idea. And I was really interested in what happens when you have to really face who you are, and particularly as a woman as you get into your 30s. I think all of us can spend a lot of your childhood and adolescence like not really being autonomous, being at the behest of parents or friends and work and maybe partners. And then often women have children and then become quite sort of at the behest of those children, and men too, to some extent. And I was just quite interested in that period in your 30s where you sort of have a moment of having to go, oh, shit, who am I? What am I doing? What have I done? And the hacked photos are really a kind of metaphor for her having to sort of face who she really is, because she's built up so many layers of artifice, the character Suzie, as an actress, of course, but like a lot of us do also in the many roles that she plays in her life. And so I'd never really seen that explored before. I'd never seen people really talk about what it's like to have your privacy invaded, as so many women have had with, so many people have had with hacked stuff on their phones, but particularly the event that happened a few years ago with the big iCloud hack,
Mhm.
that I think you didn't even think could happen until it happened. And then I was very struck by what are the unexpected impacts of that. You know, of course, there's a huge amount of invasion of privacy and the violence of that, but there's also presumably all these knock-on effects professionally, financially, personally, particularly. Like, what if those photos were not for your partner? You know, then what?
Mhm.
And it was from that I started to think, well, there's definitely story here, and it's big enough for me to feel like I want to take it on in a sort of aggressive, robust way, rather than sort of gentle thematic stuff about friendship, which it's still infused with, but with this bigger idea.
Yeah, and the structure you kind of use to tell that story is like the stages of grief. Each episode is titled after a stage of grief, like denial or fear, and I think that really allows kind of, you know, these huge tonal swings, and different dynamic each episode. So what was it for you that made that kind of concept really exciting to do?
Well, that was a really, you know, that broke it open for me as a writer. You know, coming up with that idea was when I felt like, oh, okay, I think this can be quite an interesting work of art, at least, you know, like as a whole, rather than I know what the show is, where, you know, a semi-famous actress gets her phone hacked and, oh, it's really, you know, difficult and affects her life. I kind of know what that show is as a sort of like barreling through shape, but it felt too easy to imagine for me. And I thought, well, what do I really want to express? Well, firstly, there's this real idea of how different women are, particularly in different situations, and how all of us are kind of different, play different roles and have different faces. And so even feeling like it having one genre didn't feel right to me. So what I wanted to do was break them all down, as you say, into shock, denial, fear, shame, bargaining, all the way through to acceptance, anger and acceptance. And that each of those should feel, as you say, tonally different and explore that emotion. So firstly, I think it was an attempt to have a very, very strong emotion for each episode, and to have the audience feel that emotion as well as Suzie. So anger is very specifically designed, episode 7, to make you feel quite stressed and anxious and angry about what's happening, and the speed and the pace and the editing of what's going on screen. Shock is designed to give you a formal shock during it, so you think, oh, I thought I knew what this was, but I don't know what this is. And that's meant to make you feel what Suzie's feeling. Denial, the second episode, very much about her going somewhere else entirely. She goes to Birmingham, to a hotel, to a convention, a science fiction convention, which has its own elements of denial to it, and she gets off her head on drugs. And that episode is meant to be sort of taking you away from the main pilot setup of her life in a way that's kind of denying you that. So anyway, so all of those things have been sort of thought through as different genres, but also as different feelings. And I guess what I was really interested in doing is pushing through those emotions to get to acceptance, and having the audience push through them as well, so that they go through the stages of trauma or of grief with her. But also, yeah, to show something I hadn't seen before, which is looking at a story as more like the faces on a jewel or on a diamond, than looking at a story as a narrative propelled single linear line through something, you know, to get to a point with obstacles, which, you know, there's still an element of in the show, but much less than you get in sort of normal driven, more traditionally masculine linear narrative. And I was just really interested in, can you tell a story in a slightly different way and still be compelled and still be interested? And that's kind of what the chapters of it are designed to do.
Yeah. And I think the varied chapters and themes also allow elements that are sort of a little left of reality, like maybe a little bit fantastical. She breaks out into a bit of song at one point. And is it difficult to sort of navigate that type of shift as your episodes are going through these different themes, while keeping it like centered on one character who has to stay consistent throughout?
It's very difficult. It's a tightrope walk of tone, definitely, because it's very easy to have a moment that feels uncomfortable or takes you out of it, and that, you know, that might happen for some people. I think that's okay, but actually the rather than it being difficult because you've got a central character, I think that's the key to it. So it's an unusually protagonist focused show, this. I mean, although the other actors and the other parts are essential and brilliant, the whole thing is designed to be totally in Suzie's perspective, really, and her point of view. And that's why we've got so many very aggressive close-ups. That's why we've got so much that feels like we're trying to almost get right inside her head. A bit like you would in a novel, in a first-person novel. And that's, well, part of that is to obviously really, really push the emotion of each episode. But it's also to allow us to be more formally fantastical and challenging than pure naturalism, and to see whether or not we can make that work. Because, for example, when she breaks into song in episode 1, you're really supposed to have reached a point at the end of that episode where you're so in her experience, the camera's on her shoulder all the time, you know, or very, very close up to her face, that when she breaks into song, you're experiencing that as somebody sort of having a breakdown, which is a little bit like what it feels. It feels like to be walking down the street and just sort of like muttering to yourself. And I've been in situations, you know, under extreme stress where I sort of thought, God, I could just start shouting now. Like, and because of who she is, the way that form that takes in her own mind is song, because she's a child singer, she's a child star. And so the key, I think, to being allowed those formal choices and that strangeness is actually very, very intense point of view and protagonist focus, rather than those being at odds in any way. I think doing an ensemble show like that would be very hard.
Yeah, certainly. And this show debuted on Sky and now has made its way to the States with HBO Max. And I was wondering, do you ever, like when something's coming to a different country, do you notice like different people from different countries reacting differently to it?
Yeah, I mean, I've had very mixed experiences with that in the past. I've had things that have gone really, really well in Britain and really, really badly in America. And so I was kind of, you know, primed for that. I was thinking there is something very heavily thematic about my writing, and coming from quite an authorial place, quite a formal authorial place, that I don't always know like is as popular in America as in Britain. I think it can sometimes feel a little bit controlling and a little bit sort of like, yeah, okay, all right, you know, let us enjoy it and watch it without getting your big author hands all over it. So, but people seem to, you know, be enjoying it. People who are watching it in America, I don't notice. Let's be truthful about that. Is there anything I've noticed? No, I think I was worried that there might be more distaste towards it because it's very, very much like it's got a lot of sexual kind of honesty in it, and some quite challenging, almost aggressive masochism to it. Like as a piece, it's trying to really tear away layers of pretense, and that can sometimes feel aggressive, because it is, even if it's aggressive to the self. And I did worry a little bit about whether that would feel I don't know, whether or not here that might be less welcome. I don't know why, but yeah, no, I mean, I've been really touched by how much people have responded, particularly women.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier that you usually like to have sort of one project at a time. And I've noticed you work across a bunch of different mediums. You've done TV, you've done theater. I think maybe Enron was the first thing I experienced of yours, and even video games with Destiny. Do you like having like kind of bouncing around and having that variety of mediums, or is that just sort of how it's happened for you?
No, I love it. That's very much what I like to do. I'm a writer first and foremost. I think there are different kinds of writers, you know, and some people are really inspired by one particular medium. There's, you know, they want to be a novelist or they want to be a playwright. And I just always wanted to be a writer. And I'm fascinated in how you do that in lots of different forms. And in fact, my favorite thing to do is to do 2 projects in very different mediums. So, because whenever I'm doing one, I'm always moaning and being like, oh, I wish I was doing theatre. Like in theatre, they'd never treat you like this, you know, in theatre. And then I go back and do a play and I'm like, oh my God, I wish I was doing TV. Like they just know how to get things made. This is a shit show. No one knows what they're doing. And so you've always kind of have this yearning for the other thing that I think is quite healthy, because it sort of like pinballs you back and forth, and you don't get kind of too caught up in one thing. So and I really hope to continue doing that. I'd love to do more video game work, more interactive stuff. I think there's a real future in that artistically that isn't being fully explored yet, even though there's some amazing work in it. And it's funny, I'm working in TV at the moment. I'm doing Succession season 3, which I love very much, and it's a wonderful, wonderful job and a great show. But I'm also keen to, weirdly, in a really contrarian way, get back to theatre as well at some point, because it just feels like it's such a awful time with the pandemic for the live arts, that there's part of me that really wants to, I don't know, just try and be supportive and like come up with something that people could come and see, and I don't know, to sort of like help, not run away from it, go back to try and help resuscitate it, because it seems really bad.
Yeah, it needs desperate resuscitation right now.
It did before.
Can't wait for it to be resuscitated. Well, you mentioned Succession, and before I have to let you go, I definitely wanted to ask about that, because you recently became an Emmy winner when that won Best Drama Series for your producing work on that. And the Emmys were really the first first major award show to tackle this a ceremony during the pandemic. And what was it like becoming the Best Drama winner during the pandemic?
It was really nice. I mean, look, you're talking to the wrong person here about award shows. I was just like, oh, this is great. I don't have to get a dress. I don't have to get on a fucking plane. I was like, this is terrific. We were, it was just me and some of the other writers in London in a hotel suite getting hammered. And we basically had to sit quite separately from each other because of social distancing. Right. And then we watched it on a live feed, and so I kind of really enjoyed it. I would have been so in my own head about having a sort of celebrity glitzy experience where you sort of feel the pressure of enjoying yourself and your feet hurt because you're wearing heels and you don't really understand why you're wearing heels, but you feel like you should. And actually, I really like just being with my mates in a room with free booze that HBO paid for, to be honest.
Well, that sounds like a great award show experience.
Yeah, it was nice.
Well, thank you so much, Lucy, for joining me. Everyone who's out there watching, make sure you subscribe to Gold Derby. Keep in touch with us throughout the season. And Lucy, thank you for your time once again.
Thank you. It's nice to meet you.
You too.